The research transformed into what is now called the Manual for Tsunami Vertical Evacuation Structures, currently in its second edition and published by Washington State. Every engineer designing one of these structures uses this manual as their reference document because the specifications are extraordinarily demanding. A tsunami refuge must survive 2 catastrophic disasters in rapid succession. First comes the magnitude 9 earthquake, shaking the structure violently for 5 minutes while thousands of people seek shelter inside it or attempt to reach its upper levels. Minutes later, a wall of water traveling at speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour arrives at that same structure, carrying trees uprooted by the wave. Commercial fishing boats, vehicles, pieces of other buildings destroyed by the initial surge, and layers of debris that can pile against the structure with immense force. The building must remain standing through both disasters, while hundreds of people are already on the roof. This creates an engineering problem no ordinary building code contemplates. A normal structural design code considers snow loads, wind, and seismic shaking. A tsunami refuge must be checked against hydrodynamic force, which is essentially water itself acting as a moving wall pushing against barriers. Buoyancy calculations become critical because water tries to lift structures, potentially tearing them from their foundations. Debris impact analysis is required because solid objects, from shipping containers to tree trunks, arrive at devastating speeds. Debris damming must be considered, a scenario where wreckage piles against columns and transforms a slender frame into a solid wall that the flowing water must push through with exponentially increased force. And scour, the current excavating soil from underneath the foundation, must be prevented through deep pilings and specialized foundation designs. The field of tsunami engineering continues evolving because knowledge has been arriving steadily rather than all at once. Much of what engineers now know came from surveying the devastation in Indonesia in 2004. After the Boxing Day, tsunami killed nearly 250,000 people. And in Japan in 2011, when another massive earthquake generated waves that destroyed coastal infrastructure and killed thousands. The first vertical evacuation structure in North America came into being not because of emergency planning mandates, but because a school district needed a new school anyway, and someone had the vision to ask what the roof could do. Ocosta Elementary School sits in Westport in Grays Harbor County, and in 2016 it became the first structure of its kind in North America. The refuge is the roof of the school gymnasium, engineered to provide shelter for more than 1,000 people. The platform sits approximately 55 feet above sea level and roughly 28 feet above the ground it stands upon. Ramps and stairways run up the outside of the structure, allowing people to reach the top without entering the building itself, a critical safety feature that means people don't need to navigate hallways or risk being trapped inside. The engineering beneath Ocosta is remarkable. The foundation uses drilled piers driven approximately 50 feet down, extending past the soil layers expected to liquefy during a prolonged earthquake, and deep enough that scour doesn't undermine the structure's support. The main stair towers are reinforced concrete designed for extreme loading. The columns on the seaward face are encased in additional concrete so that debris impact, whether a shipping container or a log traveling at 30 miles per hour, hits something capable of absorbing that kinetic energy. The entire structure was designed using performance-based methods, meaning engineers modeled specific hazard scenarios and checked the structure against them, rather than simply applying building code written for ordinary weather and ordinary loads. The University of Washington Tsunami Modeling Group worked directly with the design team to determine precise wave loads based on sophisticated computational modeling. But the remarkable part of the Ocosta story isn't the engineering, it's the vote that made it possible. The old school buildings were nearly a century old and situated directly inside the inundation zone. Replacing them required a school bond, and school bonds in Washington require a supermajority of 60%. The district put the measure on the ballot in 2012, and it failed. They tried again, and it failed again. Then, in April of 2013, they returned to voters a third time. The bond was for $13, $8 million. It passed with 78% of the vote. 875 people voted yes. Read that number again because it's the bigger picture in miniature. A small coastal district, twice rejected, going back a third time to ask its neighbors to tax themselves to build a roof their children might have to stand on in a moment of extreme crisis, and receiving a supermajority. That speaks to something about communities confronting existential risk. It speaks to the power of directly facing what you're afraid of. The second structure emerged from a different kind of determination. The Shoalwater Bay Indian Tribe lives at Tokeland in Pacific County, on land that is almost entirely inside the inundation zone. There is no high ground nearby. There are no viable horizontal evacuation routes. For years, the tribe worked toward a tsunami refuge, negotiating funding, coordinating with state agencies, and planning what would become the first freestanding tsunami evacuation tower in North America. On August 5th, 2022, they dedicated the completed structure. The tower stands 50 feet tall with two decks, one at 40 feet and one at 50 feet. The support piers extend 55 feet below ground, anchored deep to prevent scour and liquefaction from compromising the foundation. It's rated for more than 400 people, meaningfully more than the tribal population, and the tribe made a critical decision to open it to anyone in the area during a disaster. If you're a visitor driving through Tokeland when the ground starts moving, that tower is yours as much as it belongs to the tribe. That's a decision about community and survival that extends beyond tribal boundaries. The funding came together in pieces, as most infrastructure projects do. The tribe contributed $1, $2 million of its own funds, and FEMA provided more than $3 million. The timing at Tokeland is tighter than at Westport in one respect, and looser in another. Modeling suggests the community can reach the tower in 15 to 20 minutes on foot, and waves may take around 35 minutes to arrive, providing a small but real margin of safety that exists only because the town is compact and the tower is centrally located. At the dedication, Chairwoman Charlene Nelson said something that captures the psychological shift these structures create. She said the tower could work in any community and that working together makes such a difference. She spoke about transformation from helplessness to agency, from being victims of forces beyond control, to knowing that survival is possible through collective action. The third structure being built right now represents the first purpose-built public tower in Washington state that isn't attached to a school or tribal land. It's going into the Marina district in Westport with a construction cost around $11. $4 million and capacity for 2,000 people. The bulk of the funding is a $16 $7 million FEMA grant awarded in November 2023 under the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program. Design work began in 2020 following a planning grant in 2018. The county held a public open house on the design in late May 2026, and construction was scheduled to begin in early August 2026, with completion targeted for August 31st, 2027. Hannah Cleverly, Deputy Director of Grays Harbor County Emergency Management, described what the Marina site means in unflinching language. She said that having a site in the Marina district provides a fighting chance for people to survive when the large Cascadia subduction zone earthquake occurs. A fighting chance? That's careful language chosen deliberately because the alternative on that spit is nothing at all. The federal funding hit delays and was released in stages, which reveals something crucial about the pace of this work. Look at how the 3 existing projects were funded, and you get 3 entirely different answers. Ocosta came from a local school bond, meaning a few thousand coastal residents essentially taxed themselves. Shoalwater Bay came from tribal funds, plus a federal grant. Westport is overwhelmingly dependent on a competitive federal award that took 5 years to move from planning grant to groundbreaking. There's no standing program that simply builds these structures as needed. Every single one must be assembled from scratch by a small local government with a handful of staff competing against every other hazard project in the entire country for the same limited pot of money. That's why a hazard the state has fully mapped and fully costed still gets addressed at roughly 1 structure every 3 years. The county table, a document that sits at the heart of Washington's tsunami planning, shows the whole argument on one screen. Pacific County determined it needs somewhere between 25 and 40 structures. Grays Harbor County needs 30 to 42. Clallam County needs 1 to 3. Add those up, and you get the statewide figure at least 58, and potentially more than 80 structures needed to adequately protect vulnerable populations. At the pace of roughly 1 structure every 3 years, and at $11 to $14 million each, the math on finishing the job runs into the centuries of years and billions of dollars. That's the scale of the challenge. Nobody involved pretends otherwise, but Washington is doing something which is more than most places facing this hazard can say, and it's doing it at a fraction of the speed that the hazard would justify if money and time were unlimited. Both of those things are true simultaneously. Now cross the Columbia River into Oregon. Oregon faces the same subduction zone, the same fault, the same potential wave. In many places, it has the same low coastal geography. In 1995, the Oregon legislature passed Senate Bill 379, which did something no other West Coast state had ever done. It banned the construction of new essential facilities inside the tsunami inundation zone. Schools, hospitals, jails, police stations, fire stations, the buildings that communities vitally need after a disaster happens, and the buildings full of people who cannot evacuate themselves independently. They were prohibited from being built anywhere the waves were expected to reach. That ban stood for decades, representing a radical commitment to land use planning based on hazard mapping. But then, in 2023, Oregon repealed that ban. The essential facility prohibition was removed from state law. Now schools, hospitals, and other critical infrastructure can be built within the tsunami hazard zone. Scientists who studied the Cascadia fault objected publicly and directly. Their position was straightforward and unambiguous. The buildings covered by the ban are precisely the buildings that should never be in the water, and removing the prohibition puts people in the water. For context on how unusual either position is, California never had a ban on this kind of thing at all. That gap between the two neighboring states is striking. One state has spent the last decade slowly and expensively building places for people to climb. The other removed the rule that kept its schools out of the inundation zone entirely. Both decisions came from elected people responding to what their constituents told them mattered. Developers and property owners in coastal communities argued that the ban was too restrictive, that it prevented necessary economic development and growth. They wanted the freedom to build where land was available and valuable. Residents who wanted schools in their communities, who wanted economic opportunity and population retention, supported removing restrictions on essential facilities. These are real concerns held by real people. Mother Nature's fault line doesn't know about any of these positions, though. It doesn't distinguish between states with towers and states without them. It doesn't care about the politics of land use or the debates about development. When the fault moves, the wave will be the same on both sides of the Columbia River. Oregon hasn't stopped working on tsunami safety, to be fair. The state's geology agency maintains detailed evacuation mapping. Coastal communities run regular drills and practice evacuation procedures. The repeal removed a prohibition rather than a preparedness program, right? What it did remove was the one rule that operated on the time scale a subduction earthquake actually runs on. A drill helps the people who are there this year, but a building lasts 50 to 100 years. As where you decide to put a school is a decision about people who haven't been born yet, about how those future residents will face the hazard that their geography has already determined they'll confront. Before considering what you can actually do about this challenge, it's important to understand the limitations of these structures. A vertical evacuation tower does one job precisely. You climb it, you can survive the tsunami wave, but then you're standing on a platform in a wrecked landscape waiting for help that will take days to arrive. Possibly it will happen in February and possibly in the rain. These towers save you from drowning, but that leaves you with whatever you're carrying when you climb the stairs. No supplies, no shelter from weather, no certainty about rescue timing. You're alive, which matters enormously, but your survival has just begun. Capacity figures are engineering estimates based on assumptions. They assume people arrive in an orderly fashion and stand close together, assumptions that rarely reflect reality in true disasters. Reported capacities vary depending on who's quoting them and what assumptions they're making. In a real event, the number that matters is how many people can physically get there in time, which is unfortunately usually smaller than the platform will hold. And there's an unsolved question underneath all of this that sits at the heart of emergency planning ethics. Every structure is a decision about who gets covered. Building a tower in the Marina District means the Marina District residents have a chance. It doesn't help someone 3 miles up the road. Every site choice draws a line on a map, and people live on both sides of that line. The practicality for you and me, the single most useful thing you can do if you live on or visit this coast, is find out whether you're inside the inundation zone. Washington's Department of Natural Resources publishes tsunami hazard and evacuation mapping. The state's Emergency Management Division hosts the walk time modeling that shows exactly how long evacuation will take from different locations. Oregon's Department of Geology and Mineral Industries publishes equivalent maps for its side of the river. These are public and free. Now the second thing, and this is the one almost nobody does, is time your own walk. Take the evacuation route from your house, your workplace, your kid's school, and walk it. Not driving. Walk it. Walk it at the pace you would manage if you were frightened and the road surface was broken up. If it takes you 50 minutes, well, you now know something extremely important about your own situation that no map could tell you. Third, if there's a vertical evacuation structure near you, go and look at it in daylight. Know which stairway you'd use. Know it well enough that you don't have to think about it in a moment of crisis. And fourth, work out the version of your plan that assumes you're not at home. Most people build their emergency thinking around a kitchen or a garage, but most tsunami deaths on a coast like this will be people at work, at school, at the beach, or driving through. If you commute onto a vulnerable spit, or your children attend school inside the inundation zone, or you visit the coast twice a year, those are separate plans. Each needs its own answer to the same question. From this exact spot on foot, where do I go? How long does it take me to get there? That question has a different answer at every point on the map. The only way to have it when an emergency arrives is to have worked it out beforehand. The math of survival is simple. 15 minutes means 15 minutes. An hour of walking means an hour. The gap between them means everything.